Right. So we're diving into one that you guys have requested quite a bit. Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. And, we all have these sort of
Right.
I don't know, touchstones from our childhood, whether it's the Disney movies or just pop culture references.
Yeah.
But how does the original book stack up today?
Right.
Is it still worth your time?
Well, I'm going to be straight with you. These are undeniably classics, but I think that their appeal is very, very specific.
Okay.
They're not going to be for everyone.
No sugarcoating.
Yeah, that's fine.
I appreciate that. But why are they so divisive?
Yeah.
Looking at some of these reviews that you sent over, nonsensical pops up a lot.
Right.
One reviewer even called it a fever dream.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
Well, Carroll was writing in a style that deliberately mirrors the logic of dreams.
Okay.
He's not concerned with traditional plot structure or, cause and effect.
Right.
Instead, he's playing with free association, nonlinearity, and this constant feeling of disorientation. And that's precisely what some people find so captivating.
Yeah.
And others find frustrating.
So it's like he's trying to capture that feeling of when you're in a dream and things don't have to make sense.
Exactly.
You're just along for the ride.
Yeah, think about how in dreams you might suddenly change size.
Right.
Or the scenery shifts without warning.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happens to Alice throughout the books.
Yeah?
1 minute she's shrinking after drinking a potion.
Okay.
The next she's swimming in a pool of her own tears after growing too large. It's all about disrupting our expectations of how a story should unfold.
So I get that,
Yeah.
but just saying dreamlike can feel kind of abstract.
Right.
Can you give us some concrete examples of how this plays out in the writing itself?
Sure. So let's take the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, for instance. Instead of polite conversation, you have riddles that have no answers.
Right.
Characters are constantly interrupting each other. There's a general sense of timelessness. Carroll even writes in a way that makes the dialogue sound circular, almost like it's going nowhere.
Yeah.
If you were to read a snippet out of context, it would just feel utterly absurd.
Yeah. It's like he's trying to capture the way thoughts jump around in our heads when we're dreaming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have figures like the Cheshire Cat,
Right.
who can disappear, leaving only his grin behind.
Okay.
That's not just visually strange, it's unsettling
Yeah.
because it plays with our perception of what's real and what's not.
Mhm.
Even the Queen of Hearts, with her constant threats of off with their heads,
Right.
that's part of this dream logic.
Okay.
Her pronouncements are arbitrary. There's no real sense of justice,
Yeah.
which again mirrors that lack of consistent rules we often find in dreams.
So maybe that's why some people find it frustrating.
Right.
Because if you're expecting that kind of clear storyline with
Yeah.
cause and effect, you're going to be disappointed.
Exactly, and that's a totally valid reaction.
Yeah.
It's just not the kind of story that Carroll is telling. He's more interested in capturing a feeling and atmosphere
Right.
than delivering a neat and tidy plot.
Okay, so we've got this dreamlike quality.
Yeah.
But there's also a sense from these reviews that there's something deeper going on.
Right.
Like Carroll's using these absurd situations to say something
Yeah, absolutely.
about Victorian society.
Yeah.
Is that just reading too much into it, or is there really satire at play here?
No, you're definitely onto something.
All right.
Many scholars believe that Carroll was satirizing aspects of Victorian society,
Right.
particularly the strict social rules, the pressure to conform,
Yeah.
and even the way that adults often dismissed the imaginations of children.
So beneath the surface of all these talking animals and tea parties, there's a commentary on the real world.
Right. Think about the White Rabbit.
Okay.
He's constantly checking his watch,
Yeah.
worried about being late.
Right.
On one level, it's just funny.
Yeah.
But on another, he really represents that Victorian obsession with
Okay.
time and schedules. He's so caught up in following the rules that he's lost all sense of joy and spontaneity.
So Carroll's taking this seemingly silly thing, this rabbit with a pocket watch, and using it to make a point about
Exactly.
the pressures of Victorian life.
And this is where it gets interesting for a modern reader.
Okay.
Because even though those specific social anxieties might be different today,
Right.
we can still relate to the feeling of being overwhelmed by expectations and deadlines.
Yeah.
It's about that tension between following the rules and embracing our inner child, which is something that still resonates today.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this is making me think about the fact that we've got two books here, not just one.
Right.
How does Through the Looking Glass fit into all of this? Because the reviews seem to suggest that it takes things in a even darker direction.
That's right. Through the Looking Glass is often considered more unsettling, even a bit nightmarish,
Okay.
compared to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And this makes sense when you consider that it was written after Carroll's father died.
Right.
That sense of loss, that disruption of his world,
Yeah.
likely influenced the tone.
So the sequel is reflecting not just the general anxieties of Victorian society, but also Carroll's own personal grief.
It's definitely possible. Remember, Alice literally enters this world through a mirror.
Right.
That right there sets up this sense of distortion,
Yeah.
of things being both familiar and reversed.
Okay.
And the creatures that she encounters are often more grotesque, more menacing.
Right.
The Jabberwocky, for example, with its nonsensical poem and fearsome description. That's a far cry from the whimsical white rabbit.
Yeah. Beware the Jabberwock, my son.
Mhm.
That sticks with you even if you don't understand what it means.
Exactly. And that's part of Carroll's genius.
Right.
He creates these images and phrases that tap into our primal fears, our sense of the uncanny,
Yeah.
even if we can't logically explain why.
So if I'm hearing you right,
Hmm.
Alice's adventures in Wonderland might be more playful, more satirical,
Mm-hmm.
while Through the Looking Glass goes deeper into those darker psychological aspects
Yeah,
of dreams and even grief.
that's a good way to put it. And it's worth noting that Through the Looking Glass has a more chessboard-like structure.
Right.
Alice is literally moving across a chessboard, encountering characters that represent chess pieces.
Okay.
This adds a layer of intellectual complexity,
Right.
but it also makes the world feel more predetermined, more fated, which can be unsettling in its own way.
So it's not just random chaos. There's this underlying sense of rules and order,
Right.
but it's not necessarily a comforting kind of order.
Exactly. And that's something that modern readers might connect with even more strongly. We live in a world that often feels chaotic, out of control,
Right.
even though we have systems and structures supposedly in place.
You know, listening to you talk about all this, it's making me think of other books that play with similar ideas.
Yeah.
Like Coraline by Neil Gaiman.
Oh, absolutely.
It's also got that blend of childhood adventure and then something darker, lurking beneath the surface.
Coraline is a great example of a modern book that shares a lot of DNA with Alice,
Mm.
especially Through the Looking Glass.
Okay.
You have a young girl protagonist, a journey into a seemingly idyllic world that turns out to be sinister
Right.
and a real sense of danger.
Yeah.
But Gaiman's approach is more explicitly horror-tinged.
Oh.
While Carroll is playing with a different kind of unease, a psychological unsettlement.
So Coraline is like the direct descendant, but with a more modern
Yeah.
horror sensibility.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
And if Coraline leans into the darker side of things,
Okay.
there are other books that capture the whimsical side of Carroll's work.
Right.
The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster comes to mind. It's got those same puns, that playful use of language, but it's a bit more structured in terms of plot.
I loved the Phantom Tollbooth as a kid,
Oh, yeah.
especially that part with the doldrums,
Right.
where everything is dull and pointless. It's just this great metaphor for feeling stuck, for losing your sense of wonder.
Yes. Juster, like Carroll, is brilliant at using fantastical elements
Yeah.
to talk about real human experiences.
Right.
And the Phantom Tollbooth really emphasizes the importance of imagination and learning, which I think ties into Carroll's themes as well.
All right, so we've got these comparisons to help us understand where the Alice books fit
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But let's be practical here.
Right.
Our listener has limited time.
Sure.
What's the one key thing they should keep in mind when deciding whether or not to invest in these books?
Well, I think the biggest hurdle is simply Carroll's style.
Okay.
If you're not prepared for the dream logic,
Mm-hmm.
the lack of traditional plot,
Yeah.
the abundance of wordplay, you might find it frustrating.
Right.
But if you're willing to let go of those expectations and embrace the experience of being dropped into this strained, often unsettling,
Right.
but ultimately thought-provoking world, then I think you'll find something truly unique and rewarding in these books.
So it's not about trying to figure everything out.
Well-
It's about letting yourself be carried along by the current, so to speak.
Exactly. It's about embracing that childlike sense of wonder,
Right.
even when things get a little weird, a little scary.
All right. That's great advice. And I think it sets us up perfectly for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll give our listener a concrete recommendation
Yeah.
and something to ponder as they go forth into the world.
Yeah.
Perhaps with a newfound appreciation for the power of dreams and nonsense. Okay, so we're back, and we've talked about the dream logic, the satire, the darker element.
Right.
Now, for the big question, is it actually worth your time to read these books?
Yeah, and I think a key question to ask is, if the books themselves are reflections of dreams, are they even meant to be fully understood?
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah.
We've been talking about symbolism and deeper meaning,
Yeah.
but is it possible that the ambiguity, the lack of clear-cut answers, is part of the appeal?
I think it's both. You can absolutely analyze the symbolism, the historical context, and find layers of meaning.
Yeah.
There's a rich tradition of scholarship around these books for a reason.
Right.
But I also think there's a certain beauty in just surrendering to the flow of the story, much like you would in a dream.
So it's almost like there are two ways to experience these books.
Yeah,
You can try to decipher them, or you can just let them wash over you and enjoy the ride.
exactly. And maybe that's why they appeal to such a wide range of readers.
Yeah.
From children to adults. On one level, it's a fantastical adventure with talking animals and absurd situations.
Mhm.
But on another, it's tapping into something deeper. That part of us that still remembers the strangeness of dreams.
Yeah.
The feeling of not quite knowing the rules of the game.
Okay, so if you are looking to dive in, where would you recommend our listeners start? Should they go straight for Alice's Adventures in Wonderland? Or is Through the Looking Glass a good entry point?
I would recommend starting with Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. It's generally considered the more accessible of the two.
Okay.
A bit lighter, a bit more playful. Right.
And then if you find yourself captivated by Carroll's style and want to explore those darker, more introspective themes,
Okay.
you can move on to Through the Looking Glass.
So start with the whimsy, and then if you want to go down the rabbit hole,
Yeah.
you can venture into the looking glass.
Precisely.
Yes.
And if you really want to enhance the experience,
Yeah.
I always recommend checking out an annotated edition. Martin Gardner's is a classic.
Yeah.
It can give you so much insight into the historical context, the wordplay,
Okay.
the layers of meaning that you might miss on a first read.
Yeah, those annotated editions can be really great.
Absolutely.
They can open up a whole new dimension to a book.
And in the case of the Alice books, where so much of the humor and the meaning
Right.
is tied to the language and the time period,
Yeah.
having those annotations can really enrich your understanding and appreciation.
Well, I think we've given our listener a lot to consider.
Right.
We've explored the dream logic, the satire, the darker undercurrents.
We've even compared the Alice books to other works like Coraline and the Phantom Tollbooth to give them a sense of where these books fit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So ultimately, the decision is yours.
It is.
But hopefully we've given you a better understanding
Yeah.
of what makes these books so unique, so enduring, and even a little bit unsettling.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe we've even sparked a little bit of that childlike curiosity in you,
I hope so.
that willingness to embrace the absurd, the nonsensical, to find wonder in the unexpected.
Because sometimes the most profound journeys begin with a single step into the unknown.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Thank you.
And I think that's exactly what Alice's Adventures in Wonderland offers. A trip down the rabbit hole of imagination, where logic is suspended and anything is possible.
So go forth, dear listener, and explore whatever worlds pique your interest. Keep diving deeper, keep questioning, and keep that sense of wonder alive.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.